As I sat in that sterile rehab room, the news hit me like a freight train. My wife, the woman I had trusted with my heart, had betrayed me in my most vulnerable moment. I had entered rehab hoping to fight my demons, to reclaim my life from the grips of addiction. I had thought that while I was away, she would be my anchor, waiting for me with open arms, ready to support me in my recovery. Instead, I learned through whispered conversations among fellow patients and a text message I wasn't supposed to see that she had been unfaithful. The anger surged through me, hot and electric, but beneath it lay a deep, gnawing sadness. I felt as if the ground had vanished beneath my feet, leaving me suspended in a void of betrayal. How could she do this? The questions spiraled in my mind like a tornado, chaotic and relentless. I could almost hear the echoes of our vows, in sickness and in health, taunting me. I had trusted her to be there for me, to stand by my side as I battled my addiction. Instead, she had chosen to share her life with someone else, leaving me feeling utterly alone. The counselor had noticed my distress during group therapy. I remember the way she looked at me, her eyes filled with concern as she gently suggested that I use my feelings of betrayal as a catalyst for healing. But how could I heal when the very person I had loved and depended on had shattered my trust? It felt impossible, like trying to mend a glass vase that had been smashed into 1,000 pieces. In the days that followed, I swung between despair and rage. I found myself pacing the small room, my thoughts racing. My mind was a battleground, each emotion clashing violently with the next. I felt like a ghost, haunting the corridors of my own life, watching as my world crumbled around me. The pain was sharp, a knife twisting in my gut, but somewhere deep down, a flicker of resolve began to ignite. I could either let this consume me, or I could channel this pain into something greater. I began to write. It started as a way to vent my frustration, scribbling down thoughts in a battered notebook I'd found in the common area. Each word became a release, a way to confront the tumult within. I poured my heart onto the pages, detailing my feelings of betrayal, anger, and confusion. I wrote about the woman I thought I knew, the life we had built together, and the dreams that now felt like cruel jokes. Writing became my lifeline, a way to process my emotions when I felt completely overwhelmed. The more I wrote, the more I realized that my recovery had to be about more than just overcoming addiction. It had to be about reclaiming my life. I had to find a way to rise from the ashes of my broken trust. I would not let her betrayal define me. I would not be the victim in my own story. I began to set small goals for myself, attending every session, engaging with my peers, and confronting the demons of my past. Each step felt like a tiny victory, a reclaiming of my power. Rehab was a grueling process. With each passing day, the weight of my wife's betrayal lingered like a shadow, but I began to understand that my worth wasn't tied to her actions. I was more than the sum of my failures and heartbreaks. I was capable of change, capable of growth, and in that realization I found a flicker of hope. The journey ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but I was determined to emerge stronger. I would transform this pain into power, and I would ensure that one day she would regret her choices. As I sat in that room, surrounded by strangers who were also fighting their battles, I felt a sense of solidarity. We were all there for a reason, fighting to reclaim our lives. I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. The road to recovery had begun, and it was time to reclaim my narrative. Rehab was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The first few days were a blur of confusion and pain, each moment stretching out like an eternity. I was surrounded by people who had their own stories of struggle, each one as complex and heartbreaking as mine. We were all there for different reasons, but the common thread was the desire to break free from the chains of addiction. I quickly realized that I wasn't just battling my addiction. I was also confronting the raw emotions that came from my wife's betrayal. The days, structured, filled with group therapy sessions, individual counseling, and activities aimed at fostering self-reflection. I remember the first group session vividly. A circle of chairs, a sea of weary faces, and the air thick with unspoken pain. The therapist encouraged us to share our stories, to voice the demons that haunted us. I felt a lump in my throat as I listened to others recount their experiences. Some spoke of loss, others of hopelessness. When it was my turn, I hesitated, my heart racing. But as I began to speak, the words flowed out like a dam bursting. I talked about my addiction, my feelings of betrayal, and the anger that consumed me. To my surprise, instead of judgment, I found empathy. People nodded, understanding the depths of my pain. It felt liberating to share my truth, to be vulnerable in a space where I wouldn't be met with scorn. That moment marked a turning point for me. I realized I wasn't alone. I was part of a community of fighters, each of us striving to reclaim our lives. The counselors were a mixed bag of personalities, each with their own approach to recovery. One stood out to me. Her name was Sarah. She had a way of cutting through the noise, of reaching into the depths of our struggles and pulling out the raw truth. During one session, she asked us to write letters to our past selves, addressing the pain we had caused and the dreams we had lost. I found myself pouring my heart into that letter, reflecting on the choices that had led me to rehab. I wrote about the man I had been, the husband who had let his addiction consume him, who had taken his wife for granted. As I read my letter aloud, I felt tears stream down my face. It was cathartic to confront my past, to acknowledge my failures without the shame that usually accompanied them. The group listened intently, and when I finished, the room was silent. I could see the understanding in their eyes. They had all been there at some point. The days turned into weeks, and I began to notice changes within myself. I was becoming more aware of my triggers, the emotions that led me to seek solace in substances. I learned to replace those unhealthy coping mechanisms with healthier habits, exercise, journaling, and meditation. I started to run. Every morning, the rhythm of my feet hitting the pavement becoming a form of therapy in itself. Each mile felt like a small victory, a testament to my determination to reclaim my life. The hardest part was confronting my feelings about my wife. I had to face the reality of her betrayal and the emotional turmoil it caused. I spent countless nights wrestling with the anger that bubbled beneath the surface. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I knew that wouldn't help me heal. Instead, I focused on channeling that anger into my recovery. I began to visualize my future, one where I was free from the chains of addiction and the pain of betrayal. In one particularly poignant session, Sarah asked us to imagine our lives 5 years down the line. I closed my eyes and envisioned a version of myself that was confident, successful, and happy. I pictured a life filled with purpose, where my past didn't dictate my future. I could see myself in a fulfilling job, surrounded by supportive friends, and perhaps even in a new relationship, one built on trust and mutual respect. Each day was a step closer to that vision. I started to set goals for myself, both short-term and long-term. I wanted to get sober, yes, but I also wanted to rebuild my career and my self-esteem. I enrolled in online courses, determined to learn new skills and expand my horizons. I realized that the path to recovery wasn't just about abstaining from substances. It was about rediscovering who I was outside of addiction and betrayal. As the weeks progressed, I found a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. I was starting to understand that my worth wasn't tied to my relationship with my wife or my past mistakes. I was forging my path, one step at a time. I learned to embrace the pain as part of my journey, a necessary step toward growth. The journey of recovery was far from easy. There were days when the weight of my emotions felt unbearable, when the memories of my wife's infidelity threatened to pull me under. But I clung to the belief that I could rise above it. I was determined to emerge from this experience not just sober but transformed. With each passing day, I felt stronger, more resilient. I was ready to turn my pain into power and take control of my life. Little did I know, the most pivotal moments were yet to come, and they would shape the course of my journey in ways I couldn't yet imagine. As I settled deeper into my recovery, I began to channel my pain into motivation. I started to think about the life I wanted to build for myself, one that was far removed from the shadows of addiction and betrayal. My days were no longer filled with a haze of confusion. Instead, they were punctuated with purpose. I was determined to reclaim not only my sobriety but also my identity. I set tangible goals for myself, focusing on various aspects of my life, career, health, and personal development. I realized that if I wanted to succeed, I needed to create a solid foundation. My first step was to revitalize my career. Before rehab, I had been a mid-level manager in a marketing firm, but my addiction had taken a toll on my performance. I had neglected my responsibilities, allowing projects to slip through the cracks, and my reputation had suffered as a result. While in rehab, I started taking online courses related to digital marketing and data analysis. I immersed myself in learning, absorbing everything I could. The more I educated myself, the more empowered I felt. I spent hours after group sessions studying, taking notes, and completing assignments. I no longer wanted to be the man who let his addiction dictate his career. I wanted to be the man who took charge of his destiny. One day, I received an email from a former colleague who had always believed in my potential. She reached out to see how I was doing and mentioned an opening at her company for a marketing director position. I felt a rush of excitement mixed with fear. This was my chance to re-enter the workforce, but it also meant facing the world that I had left behind in shame. I hesitated, but then I remembered the vision I had created during therapy, my future self, confident and successful. I couldn't let fear hold me back. I spent the next few days preparing my resume and practicing for the interview. I reached out to my colleague for advice and even set up a mock interview with another resident at rehab who had experience in hiring. Each practice session built my confidence. I was determined to show them that I was more than my past mistakes. I was ready to prove that I could be a valuable asset to their team. The day of the interview arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and excitement. I dressed in a suit that I hadn't worn in years, a reminder of the man I used to be and the man I was becoming. As I walked into the office, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that I had worked hard to get to this point. I belonged here. The interview went better than I could have imagined. I spoke passionately about my vision for the marketing strategies I wanted to implement and how my experiences had shaped my understanding of resilience and adaptability. I could see the interest in their eyes, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of hope. A few days later, I received a call offering me the position. I was elated. It felt like I had climbed a mountain, and the view from the top was breathtaking. This was the beginning of a new chapter in my life, one where I was no longer defined by my addiction but by my achievements and the person I was becoming. As I settled into my new role, I also focused on my health. I started running more seriously, participating in local 5K races and setting personal records. Each run became a metaphor for my journey, sometimes grueling, sometimes exhilarating, but always rewarding. I learned to push through the discomfort, to embrace the challenge. I began to feel stronger both physically and mentally. I also started eating healthier, replacing my old habits with nutritious choices. I discovered a passion for cooking, experimenting with new recipes and sharing meals with fellow residents at rehab. Cooking became another outlet for my creativity, a way to nourish my body and mind. I realized that taking care of myself was an essential part of my recovery. In the midst of this transformation, I was also rediscovering who I was outside of my relationship with my wife. I began to explore my interests and passions that had been buried beneath layers of addiction and neglect. I took up painting, something I had loved in my youth but had abandoned long ago. I found solace in the strokes of the brush, allowing my emotions to flow onto the canvas. Each piece I created was a reflection of my journey, a visual representation of my pain, growth, and resilience. As I embraced this new chapter, I found myself becoming more involved in the rehab community. I started mentoring newer residents, sharing my story and offering support. It was empowering to help others navigate their struggles, and in doing so, I found a renewed sense of purpose. I realized that my journey wasn't just about my own recovery, it was about helping others find their way as well. With each passing day, I felt a sense of empowerment growing within me. I was no longer the man who had succumbed to addiction. I was becoming someone who could face challenges head-on. I was learning to trust myself again, to believe in my abilities. I was building a life that was not only sober but filled with passion and purpose. As I approached the end of my time in rehab, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in how far I had come. I had transformed my pain into motivation, and I was ready to step into the world as a new man. The next phase of my journey awaited, and I was eager to embrace it. I knew that the road ahead would not be without its trials, but I felt equipped to face whatever came my way. I was ready to leave behind the remnants of my past and walk confidently into my future. I had learned to rise above betrayal, to channel my pain into power, and I was determined to create a life that was truly my own. As I prepared to leave rehab, my mind was a whirlwind of emotions. I was excited about the next chapter, yet there was an undeniable weight on my heart. I knew that I had to confront my wife about her infidelity. I had avoided it for so long, thinking that perhaps I could just walk away without addressing the elephant in the room. But I realized that to truly move forward, I needed closure. I needed to face her and express how her betrayal had affected me. I scheduled a meeting with her for the day after my discharge. I still had the faintest hope that she might have changed, that maybe she regretted her actions and wanted to reconcile. But deep down, I knew that I was no longer the same man who had been blindsided by her betrayal. I was stronger, more resilient, and I wouldn't allow myself to be a victim any longer. The day of our meeting arrived, and my heart raced as I drove to the cafe where we had agreed to meet. The familiar surroundings felt tainted, reminders of the happy moments we had shared before everything fell apart. I parked my car and took a deep breath, reminding myself of all the progress I had made. I was no longer defined by my past. I was ready to confront it. When I walked into the cafe, I spotted her sitting at a corner table, her fingers nervously fidgeting with her coffee cup. She looked beautiful, but there was a certain emptiness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. As I approached, I could see the tension in her posture. I sat down, and for a moment we simply stared at each other, the silence heavy with unspoken words. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had to," I replied, trying to keep my tone steady. "We need to talk about what happened." She nodded, and I could see the guilt washing over her face. "I know I hurt you, and I'm so sorry for that. I was lost, and I made terrible choices." Anger surged within me, but I fought to keep it in check. "You were lost. What about me? I was in rehab trying to save my life, and you chose to betray me. You knew how vulnerable I was. How could you do that?" Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I wondered if she truly understood the gravity of her actions. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I could handle it. I thought you wouldn't find out." "Find out?" I echoed, incredulous. "You thought it was okay to be with someone else while I was fighting my demons. You thought that was okay." "I was selfish," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I didn't think about how it would affect you. I was caught up in my own issues." I felt the rage boiling inside me, but I took a deep breath and forced myself to remain calm. "You say you were caught up in your own issues, but what about my issues? What about the man you promised to stand by, the vows we made?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. The touch that once brought me comfort now felt tainted. "Don't," I said sharply, my voice firm. "You don't get to reach out to me after what you did. I need you to understand how deeply you hurt me." "I do understand," she pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. "I've been going to therapy, trying to figure out why I did what I did. I want to make things right. I want us to work through this." The sincerity in her voice struck a chord, but I couldn't ignore the reality of what she had done. I had worked so hard to rebuild myself, to rediscover my worth, and I couldn't allow her to drag me back into the darkness. "You don't get to decide that for me," I said, my voice steady. "I've changed, and I'm not sure I can trust you again." Her expression shifted, a mixture of panic and realization washing over her. "What are you saying? Are you saying you want to leave me?" I paused, the weight of the decision pressing down on my chest. "I think I have to. I can't go back to what we had. I need to focus on myself and my future." The tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered, "Please don't do this. I love you. I want to fix this." "I don't know if love is enough anymore," I said, feeling a pang of sorrow. "I need to prioritize my healing. I can't allow myself to be pulled back into the past. She sat back in her chair, the realization of my words sinking in. I could see the heartbreak etched on her face, and even though a part of me felt sympathy, I knew that this was the right decision for me. I had spent too long living in the shadow of her choices, and I was finally stepping into the light. I hope you find the help you need, I said gently but firmly. I hope you can learn from this and grow, but I can't be a part of it anymore. As I stood to leave, I felt a mix of emotions, sadness, relief, and a newfound clarity. I had confronted my past, faced the woman who had betrayed me, and made a choice that was best for my future. I was no longer the man who had been blindsided. I was a man who had fought for his life and had emerged stronger. Walking out of that cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was ready to embrace my independence, to forge a new path free from the chains of betrayal. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead. I had taken a significant step toward reclaiming my life, and I knew that I was on the right track. With the confrontation behind me, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. I had taken a definitive step away from the pain of my past, and now it was time to embrace the future I had envisioned. My focus shifted entirely to my career and personal growth. I was ready to dive into this new chapter with all the enthusiasm I could muster. Returning to work after rehab was a monumental moment for me. I walked into the office of my new job with a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. The team was welcoming, and I quickly found my footing as I began implementing the strategies I had learned during my time away. I was no longer just a manager, I was a leader. My ideas were respected, and my contributions were valued. The change in my work environment was invigorating, and I found myself thriving in the collaborative atmosphere. One of my first major projects was to launch a digital marketing campaign for a new product line. I poured myself into the project, spending long hours brainstorming and collaborating with my team. The thrill of seeing my ideas come to life was exhilarating. I felt a sense of accomplishment that had eluded me for so long. It was as if I had finally found my place in the world, a place where I belonged, where my voice mattered. As the campaign progressed, I received positive feedback from upper management. My confidence soared, and with it came a renewed sense of self-worth. I was no longer the man defined by his addiction or his wife's betrayal. I was a professional who was making a name for himself. The accolades began to pour in, and I was recognized as Employee of the Month just a few months into my role. It was a testament to my hard work and dedication, a validation of the journey I had undertaken. Outside of work, I continued to nurture my personal growth. Running became a ritual for me, a way to clear my mind and focus on my goals. I signed up for a half marathon, something I had always dreamed of doing but had never believed I could accomplish. The training was grueling, but with each mile I felt stronger. I was not just running, I was reclaiming my life. The physical exertion became a metaphor for my emotional journey, pushing through the pain, embracing the struggle, and emerging victorious. I also found myself forming new friendships, connections with people who understood the importance of growth and healing. I started attending local support groups, not just for addiction, but for anyone navigating the complexities of life. Sharing my story and hearing others' experiences helped me realize that I wasn't alone in my struggles. It was a supportive community that encouraged me to keep moving forward, and I felt a sense of camaraderie that enriched my life. As I continued to evolve, I also began to explore new interests. I took a painting class at a local studio, rediscovering the joy of creating art. It became an outlet for my emotions, a way to express what I had been through. Each brushstroke on the canvas was a release, a way to transform my pain into something beautiful. I even participated in a local art show where I displayed my work for the first time. The experience was both terrifying and exhilarating, but I was proud of what I had accomplished. In the midst of all this, I began to realize that I was ready to open my heart again. I had spent so long healing and growing that the idea of a new relationship began to take root in my mind. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the void left by my wife. I was seeking a partner who would appreciate me for who I had become. I signed up for a dating app, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. My first date was with a woman named Mia. She was warm, engaging, and had a passion for the arts that mirrored my own. We spent hours talking, sharing our stories and dreams. It felt refreshing to connect with someone who understood the journey of transformation. As we continued to meet, I found myself opening up in ways I hadn't expected. I was no longer afraid to share my past. Instead, I embraced it as part of my story. Mia appreciated my honesty, and what blossomed between us was something genuine. It felt liberating to be with someone who celebrated my growth rather than defined me by my past. We supported each other's ambitions, and our relationship became a source of inspiration. I learned what it meant to build a partnership based on mutual respect and understanding, and it filled me with hope for the future. As the months went by, I continued to excel at work, deepen my connections, and nurture my passions. I was becoming the man I had always wanted to be, a man who was not only sober but thriving. I was proud of the life I was building, a life filled with purpose, joy, and love. Looking back, I realized that the pain of betrayal had been a catalyst for my transformation. It had pushed me to confront my demons, to take responsibility for my life, and to strive for something greater. I had learned to rise from the ashes of my past, and in doing so I had discovered my worth. With each success, I felt a sense of empowerment that fueled my motivation. I was no longer just surviving, I was truly living. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of strength, resilience, and hope. As I stood on the precipice of this new chapter in my life, I reflected on how far I had come. The journey from addiction and betrayal to empowerment and success felt surreal. I had transformed my pain into a powerful force that propelled me forward, and I was ready to embrace my future with open arms. But there was one final step I needed to take, to officially close the door on my past. I had been living my life with a sense of freedom, but I knew that the lingering ties to my wife still held some weight. Despite the confrontation we had, I hadn't formally severed our relationship. I needed to take the final step and file for divorce. It was time to release myself from the shackles of a marriage that had become a painful reminder of betrayal. I scheduled an appointment with a divorce attorney, and as I walked into her office, I felt a mix of anxiety and relief. I had been dreading this moment, but I also understood that it was necessary for my healing. The attorney was kind and understanding, guiding me through the process and answering my questions. I laid out the details of my marriage, sharing the reasons for my decision. "Your well-being is what matters most," she said, offering me a reassuring smile. "You've worked hard to rebuild your life, and you deserve to move forward without the burden of this relationship." Her words resonated with me. I had fought so hard to reclaim my identity, and I wasn't about to let my past dictate my future. I signed the paperwork, feeling a sense of empowerment wash over me. It was a final acknowledgement of the journey I had undertaken, one that had led me to a place of strength and clarity. The days that followed were filled with a mix of emotions. I felt lighter, more at peace with my decision, but there were also moments of sadness. I had once envisioned a life with my wife, a future filled with dreams and shared moments. But that life had been shattered, and I had to accept that the person I had once loved was not the same person I needed in my life now. As the divorce proceedings moved forward, I continued to focus on my personal growth and my relationship with Mia. She had become a source of joy in my life, and our bond deepened with each passing day. I appreciated her support and understanding as I navigated this difficult transition. She never pressured me to rush through my feelings. Instead, she encouraged me to take my time and process everything. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, I shared my thoughts about the divorce. "It feels strange to finally be closing that chapter," I admitted, staring into the distance. "I never thought I'd be here, but I know it's the right thing to do." Mia reached for my hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "You've come so far, and I'm proud of you for making this decision. You deserve happiness and freedom, and I'm here to support you every step of the way." Her words filled me with gratitude. I realized that I had not only found a partner in her but also a friend who understood my journey. Together, we began to build a life filled with laughter, creativity, and love, one that was rooted in mutual respect and growth. As the divorce was finalized, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't anticipated. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and I was finally free to embrace the future without the shadows of my past looming over me. I had learned valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and the importance of self-worth. I had transformed my pain into power, and I was ready to step into the world with confidence. In the months that followed, I continued to thrive in my career, my relationship, and my personal endeavors. I completed the half marathon I had trained for, crossing the finish line with tears of joy streaming down my face. It was a testament to my journey, a reflection of the strength I had discovered within myself. I also found joy in giving back to the community. I volunteered at local organizations that supported those struggling with addiction, sharing my story to inspire others who were fighting their own battles. I realized that my journey wasn't just about my own healing. It was about helping others find their way as well. Looking back, I understood that the pain of betrayal had been a catalyst for my transformation. It had pushed me to confront my demons, to take responsibility for my life, and to strive for something greater. I had emerged from the ashes not as a victim but as a survivor, a man who had fought for his life and had won. As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant colors, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I was free, empowered, and ready to embrace whatever life had in store for me. I had learned to rise above betrayal, to channel my pain into power, and to create a life filled with purpose and joy. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had led me to a place of strength, resilience, and hope. I knew that I was on the right path, and as I looked ahead, I felt a sense of excitement for the future. I was ready to embrace my newfound freedom and self-respect, and I couldn't wait to see where this journey would lead me next.